Some of us were here last night for the Lunar New Year celebrations, and it was great. I came in and it smelt fantastic. The food was amazing. And so thanks to those who put all that on. You would have seen the decorations on the way in, and it was a wonderful celebration. Thanks for those who hosted that for us. It was a great time together. Well, there's a lot of doorways in the world, aren't there? Maybe you've stood in front of some amazing doorways. Like many of you have travelled, and I've stood at the gates of Buckingham Palace. That was pretty amazing. What are some amazing gates or doors that you've stood in front of and looked through? Maybe, there was the door to the church on the day you got married and you walked in, and that was the moment. Or maybe you're traditional and you carried your wife, your bride, across the threshold of the door of your home when you got home after the wedding. Maybe that's traditional. What are some of the doors you stood in front of? And maybe someone, career-wise, maybe someone's opened a door for you. We talk like that. They opened a door for me. They gave me an opportunity. But there's some really important doors. They could be physical doors, or they could be like opening a door of opportunity for someone. There's some really important doors in life, and gates and entryways. And here in Revelation chapter 4, which we're going to look at today, we come across a really, really important door. In Revelation 3, in fact, Jesus talks about a door in Revelation 3, verse 20. He says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears and opens the door, I will come in." And he's talking, of course, about the doorway to our heart, and we can open that door or close that door. We can open it to Jesus, or we can close it off to Jesus. The doorway to our heart. Bruce Springsteen sings a fantastic song about this, about the depths of our heart. We can open it to people. The secret garden in the heart, that's the name of the song, you should look it up. But it talks about this secret garden that we all have deep inside, and we get to choose who we let in there and who we let out. But Jesus is talking about this doorway into our hearts. And when he comes in, he says he stands there and knocks, and when we open the door to him and he comes in, he transforms our lives dramatically, doesn't he? And then in chapter 4 of Revelation, there's an even more incredible door. It says there in Revelation 4 verse 1, "After this, I, John, looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven." This is an amazing doorway. A doorway to heaven, not a stairway to heaven. Another great song. But a doorway to heaven that John stands in front of, and this doorway to heaven is open. And the Apostle John, who is the writer of the book of Revelation, he's the author, well, the Holy Spirit's the author, John is the writer, he actually gets to step into and through this door into heaven, and he gets to see what's going on in heaven. Now, that's a common experience. All of us will one day step through a door before God and be judged by him. But not all of us get to report back on what we saw. John does, and that's what we see in Revelation. John gets to report back on what he's seen. So it's not a very common experience in that sense, but it's also, it has been repeated, because there are other people in the Bible who had a similar experience. Ezekiel and Isaiah, they got to look through the doorway and to see heaven. But when we read about John's experience, and we'll do that in just a moment, it's a little bit different, because John didn't just get to look through the door. John actually got to step through the door into the throne room of God and to perceive what was going on there and then report back on that. He actually got to go up into heaven and to see what was going on and then to report on that. Now, before we explore that too much further, I want to talk about how we're supposed to approach this, how we're supposed to approach Revelation and this teaching about about heaven. And sometimes when we think about the future, and even Christians do this, when we think about the future, we can approach it with an attitude of worry. Even Christians do this. We might be worried about what's going to happen. When is it going to happen? When's the tribulation going to be? Am I going to be made to wear a barcode on my forehead? Am I going to suffer? And we unknowingly sometimes come to the book of Revelation with an attitude of worry. And I hope you can see that's entirely the wrong attitude to come to Revelation, isn't it? To come to any book of the Bible, to come there with the attitude of worry. Jesus tells us that we shouldn't worry about anything, but in everything we should trust him. And honestly, if we find Revelation a confusing book, it's probably because deep down inside somewhere we're worried about something. If we can't put the pieces together, it could be because we're approaching the book in the wrong way. We're approaching it perhaps with an attitude of worry. So what is the attitude we should approach the book with? Well, we should approach it with an attitude of worship. And we need to recognise God for who he is. We need to recognise the greatness he has and the incredible plans that he has for our universe. And if you walk through every verse of Revelation with an attitude of worship, not worry, but worship, that begins to unlock things for us. It begins to make things clear and understandable when we approach with an attitude of worship and not worry. How do we know this? Well, we know it because that's exactly how the book of Revelation starts. It starts with worship. It's full of worship and it ends with a worship. Before God even begins to tell us about the future, before he unrolls any scrolls, before any trumpets are blown, before any bowls are emptied, as we read on in Revelation, that's what happens. Before any of that happens, there's worship. The book begins with worship, it's full of worship, and it ends with worship. Revelation is one of the most incredible worship books in the Bible. It's just filled with the worship of God. And so worship is the attitude that unlocks the book of Revelation for us. Not worry, but worship. And that's the scene that unfolds in front of John as he steps through this door to heaven. An amazing scene of worship in heaven. And the focus of this worship is the throne of God. And we'll see this as I'm going to read through chapter 4 bit by bit as we go on. But as we do that, we'll see that the throne of God is the focus of this worship. Everything is focused around the throne. And that's why if we're really going to understand Revelation, we have to begin with the throne of God. In fact, we have to begin with an understanding of God's absolute sovereignty. His absolute sovereignty. That's what the throne means. God is the ruler. He's absolutely sovereign. He is the absolute authority. He is the supreme ruler over all people and all things in the entirety of the universe. It's all his. It all belongs to him. He created it all, and he is the ultimate authority over all of it. That's where we have to start. If we want to understand Revelation, that's where we have to start. And in fact, if you want to understand anything, that's where we have to start. If you want to understand yourself, you have to start with the ultimate authority, the supreme rulership of God over all things. If we want to understand this world, we have to understand that God is the supreme authority. When we read the news and we read about women being murdered in their own homes, or children starving to death in some far-off country, or men killing each other in war, if we want to understand any of that, we have to start with the supreme authority of God. The throne of God reminds us that God's in control. Despite the chaos we see, that God is still on the throne and that he is still in control. Now, here's an amazing fact about the word throne in the New Testament. If we were to take the book of Revelation out of the New Testament, the word throne appears 11 times in the whole of the Gospels and the epistles and all that. It only appears 11 times. But in the book of Revelation, the word throne appears 42 times. And in the chapter we're looking at today, chapter 4, it appears 11 times just in chapter 4. So it's a major theme, the throne of God, the authority of God, the supreme rulership of God is a major theme in Revelation. One commentator says this. He said, the fact that there is a throne means that there are absolutes that cannot be altered or changed. They are guaranteed by the authority of that throne. Nothing humanity does or can do alters them in the least degree. So God's throne is a place of security for us. It should be. In a world that's full of chaos and often looks like it's out of control, when we look at God's throne, we can say, God is still on the throne. That is a major foundation for life. It's a major foundation for peace in life when everything's out of control. A place of security, a place of worship, a place of recognising who God is, a place of recognising his absolute and ultimate authority. So I want to look at this throne as we go through chapter 4. What's going on in this throne room of God that John steps into? As he steps into the door of heaven, he steps into the throne room of God, what does he see? Well, first of all, he describes who he sees sitting on the throne. Let's have a look in Revelation chapter 4, the first 5 verses. John says, after this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here and I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. And from the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings and peals of thunder. And so John enters through this door and he enters into heaven, into the throne room of God. And what does he see? He sees the throne and he sees someone sitting on it. What did he notice about it? He notices the amazing colours. He saw colour, he saw beauty, he saw excitement, he saw activity, he saw things going on, movement. There's lightning, there's colour. And later on we'll see there's singing, there's all these things going on. What he didn't see is a dull, drab and boring heaven. Heaven is exciting. It's full of colour, it's full of beauty, it's full of God's magnificence. It is not a dull, dreary and boring place. It's full of excitement. And he tries to describe the person that he saw by using just human language, which is quite a feat. And the best he can come up with is that this person that he saw had the appearance of jasper and ruby, or in other versions say jasper and carnelian. And now if we lived in the first century, we'd know exactly what he was talking about, because these are the stones that the high priests would wear on their robes. Jasper and carnelian. So this is not just about the stones, it's about what they mean. They represent who God is. And the jasper we read about in the New Testament, it was a stone that looked like a diamond. It may have even been a diamond. But whatever the case, it was a pure stone, like a pure diamond. And it represents God's purity. So John saw God's purity. And he also saw carnelian or ruby. And of course, rubies are red. And a red ruby represents two things. It represents God's wrath on the one hand, and it represents his forgiveness on the other. Sometimes we say things like, I was so angry I saw red. Ever said that? It's an old-fashioned saying, I suppose, isn't it? I was so angry I saw red. This is where that comes from, because it represents God's wrath, and God is angry. He's angry about the way sin has damaged his world. He's angry at the way sin has broken you and me. He's angry at the way sin has broken his world. He's angry about that. He's wrathful about that. And that's what red represents here in this ruby, this carnelian. But he's also graceful. And of course, as Christians, when we think of the colour red, we're taken straight to the cross, aren't we? And the blood of Christ, the communion, the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, whatever you want to call it, the wine. We're taken to the blood of Christ and the forgiveness of God, the grace of God. And so red represents these two extremes of God, his anger at what sin has done to his creation, but also his grace and his forgiveness about what he's done about that through the blood of Christ. And so God's colour is purity, justice, and forgiveness. Have you ever wondered about what colour God is? I mean, some of us here are white, some are brown, some are yellow, some are black. But what colour is God? Well, this is the colour of God. John's trying to describe the colour of God, and his colour is purity. His colour is justice. His colour is forgiveness, represented in the jasper and the carnelian, the ruby. This is what John saw on the throne. He saw God's purity, he saw his wrath, and he saw his grace, his forgiveness. And one day, you and I will get to see the colour of God. Can you imagine that? We're going to see what colour God is as we stand before his throne on our day of judgment. We will see his purity. We'll see his innocence, his complete righteousness, his utter fairness. We will see his justice. We will know without a doubt that God's judgment on us will be right and fair. And we will see his grace, his forgiveness, applied to our lives according to our response to Jesus. This is the colour that John could see in heaven, the colour of God, and you and I will get to see that colour one day. This is what John saw on the throne. And next he describes what he saw going on around the throne. He says in verse 3 that he saw a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. A rainbow that shone like an emerald. This is an interesting picture, isn't it? And that encircled the throne. Now, this is not an arc, like a rainbow we might see down at the ocean or when it rains, like we see here on earth. This rainbow encircles the throne. It's a complete circle. And interestingly, it's not multicoloured. It's only one colour. It's emerald, it's green. And so this is a picture for us of life. And we know that because it's green. Green represents life. We know it because it's an unbroken circle, and that represents life. And we know it because it's a rainbow, and rainbow, biblically, it represents life. God is the sustainer of life. Of course, when we hear the word rainbow, we think of Noah, don't we? And the story of Noah takes us straight back there and to the promise that God made to Noah, to all of his creation, that he would never destroy all of life again with a global flood. And so God's throne is a place of promise. God's throne is where his promises come from. God promised Noah and all creation, and this is where the promise came from. It came from his throne. It says in Genesis 9, God said, I am going to make a solemn promise to you and to everyone who will live after you. This includes the birds and the animals that come out of the boat. I promise every living creature that the earth and those living on it will never be destroyed by a flood, never again be destroyed by a flood. This promise of life came from God's throne. God sustains life and he keeps his promises. And this promise to Noah came from God's heavenly throne. And every life-giving promise that God has uttered comes from his throne. It originates from the throne of God. And God has issued many, many life-giving promises. Some we read in the Bible here. I've just given you a few examples. He promises strength for the weary in Isaiah 40, rest in Matthew 11. He promises unfailing love in Isaiah 54. He promises wisdom in James 1. He promises forgiveness when we ask for it in 1 John 1 verse 9. He promises his constant presence in Deuteronomy 31 and in many other places. He promises his freedom. He promises us answered prayer in Mark 11 and Psalm 50. He promises generous provision in Philippians and in Matthew. He promises and power. For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. Not mine, yours. We didn't create anything. You are worthy, not me. You are worthy, God, to receive glory and honour and power. That's what we're supposed to see here. We're supposed to see what they're doing. That's what's important here. They are worshipping. Friends, one day, every earthly power will finally and for all eternity be submitted to God's rule, even yours. If any honour, if any authority, if any leadership responsibility has been given to you in this life, one day you will lay it down at the feet of God. You will remove that crown and lay it at his feet. He will demand it and you will not be able to resist. You will give up your honour. In fact, that's how we're supposed to live today, isn't it? If any honour has ever come your way, we are to deflect that honour to our God, the glorious God, the majestic God who created everything, who created you, who gave you that honour. We're intended to give it back to him. All glory, all honour that might come our way is his, not ours. And so as we come to the end of this amazing outpouring of worship before the throne of God, we get a picture, just a human picture, as best as John can describe, of what God is like. And he's amazing. It's an amazing sight. The majesty of God is absolutely amazing. He is worthy of our worship. And there's nothing more worthy for us to be doing with our lives than worshipping God. And of course, that's more than just singing a few songs. We are to live in an attitude of worship. We're to worship God in everything we do, our work, our parenting, our relationships, in the community and in our family, our study on campus. We're to do it all as an act of worship. Our service in the church, we're to do it all as an act of worship, to live lives of worship. That's what it means to live a life of worship, to live constantly in an attitude of worship. In Philippians, Paul writes this, Philippians 2, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is the Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That's what John got to see. And in his description, John is attempting to take us there, right into the throne room of God. And I'm going to ask the band to come up. I think they're here. Yes, great. If the band could come forward. John is taking us, doing his best to describe what he saw in the throne room of God. He's trying to take us there and to help us see what the future is for those who love Jesus. That it's a place of majesty, that it's an awe-inspiring place, that it's a place of security because of God's ultimate and supreme authority. He's trying to describe that to us in human words. So I want us to try and imagine that right now. Here, if you're watching online or here in the room, I want you to close your eyes and to try and picture what John is describing to us here as we close. To try and imagine what it might be like to be in John's shoes and to enter into heaven and to experience the throne room. Just imagine with me, close your eyes, bow your heads and imagine with me that you are in the throne room of God right now. You see God in all his majesty. You see the purity of God. You see the justice of God. You see the grace of God. You see the emerald rainbow of life. You see these weird creatures and they're singing worship to God around the throne. You see the 24 elders dressed in purity remove their crowns, what would you be feeling? Are you afraid? Are you worried? Or do you feel peace, love, joy, happiness? What are you feeling as you imagine the throne room of God? And as you imagine that you're there, you're right there in the throne room of God right now, what would you do? Would you shake your fist at God in defiance? Or would you bow down and remove your crown and lay it before the throne? And as you hear the angels singing and the elders worshipping, what would you say? Would you give God a piece of your mind? Or would you say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come? Would you express thanks for all that He's given you, all that He's done for you in giving Jesus to pay the price for your sin on the cross? How would you tell the Lord how grateful you are for what He's done for you? Friends, I want you to hold that thought as we close our service now in worship. I want you to stand with me. Open your eyes now and stand with us as we sing the best we can in this life, our worship to our Almighty God. Let's sing, shall we?